new federal court case law on the SUV program and Mandamus, a review of new legislation, C-12, a summary of compliance trends for employers on this edition of ImmPulse.
I'm Howard Greenberg.
Hi, I'm Greenberg Hameed.
Well, today, Noman, I think this is a really special edition of ImmPulse. It has a lot of key case law discussions, legislative discussions, and a little bit of insight as to the changes to the temporary worker program and how the number of temporary worker applications have dropped.
Right.
So let's start with case law.
Sure.
There's an interesting case on Mandamus, meaning requiring an officer to make a decision. And that's been very topical. Every second call we get in the office these days is about Mandamus because these applications have been outstanding for 4 years with no feedback from IRCC. And the question is, what's the next step? And the next step is Mandamus. Do you want to discuss a little bit about the takeaway from the case that we reported in our ImmPulse?
Sure. So this particular case talked about concerns. It was a citizenship application. It had been pending for over 3 years. And at one point, IRCC's response was that it was pending security, but well beyond the processing time. And the federal court held that blanket statement simply stating that a third party is reviewing security screening is not sufficient, that there has to be more relevant information shared in the process. And we've seen this in our practice, many countries around the world, very routine. Your application across all categories could very well end up in security. And it's important to be diligent because often you'll find that they'll just sort of pend for a long time.
Well, many cases are sent off to security because there are certain triggers in the individual's occupation or past education. And once it's in security, there are shortages of staff. There's not sitting in security because there's real concerns that need to be looked at for 4 years. There's just not enough people to do the job.
Correct. And we've seen this. This is not unique to any one process. We've seen PNP applications, startup visa applications. This was a citizenship application, work permits. Unfortunately, right across the board, substantial delays, but you can anticipate based on the nationality, like you say, your occupation, if it's sensitive, if it's involving areas of government work that you've done or areas of tech. You can predict in some instances that you might be at a higher risk.
In the old days when I was doing PR applications for China, if I saw the work history translator, I'd tell them to put their feet up for a couple of years. They're not getting through right away.
Right. And important to get your GCMS notes and try to identify early when the application might be caught for security and then to take actions. We've had a lot of sessions, demand notices, make sure you keep IRCC accountable and you've got a fair process so you can challenge if you need to.
That's a great lead into the SUV case, which is reported. And I particularly like this case because I think it's applicable to many of our viewers out there who may have been didn't come to Canada while their SUV application is being developed in Canada, or B, were refused a work permit, or C, were refused an extension of their work permit and they have to leave. And the question is, to what extent the officer can fasten on to the individual's activities in Canada and then form the view they really weren't interested in setting up a business.
All right.
So maybe we could just say a few words about what we think that decision may mean.
So maybe I'll set the stage. In this case, the individual applicant had filed an application and the concerns raised by the officer were twofold. One, they felt that the business plan was very similar to another business plan. And number two, they felt that there was a lack of personal activities in the business.
In Canada. So there's a phrase in that decision that I find particularly helpful, where the judge pointed out that was the focal point of the officer making a determination about the business, the activities in Canada. And if that's tied to being in Canada and tied to working under a work permit, when you're denied a work permit, you can see that's problematic for at least 80% of the individuals now who are being refused their work permits on the SUV program.
Right.
If that's the interpretation, then this case is welcome relief, because that in and of itself is not a reasoned decision that can be supported in a court proceeding.
Yeah, in fact, in this case, and this is one of the few cases on artificial transaction where we've seen the court side with the applicant, the conclusion was that those two factors may have colored the view of the officer to the exclusion of other information that was presented.
Yes.
And we had a discussion last week in another case where lack of business activities is always a concern. But what's important is if there is potentially a reason why you were not as involved in the business in Canada, if you provide other evidence holistically, the officer still has to review the entirety of the application and make a reasoned, intelligent decision. So there's always room to cover issues and make sure you document fully.
So that leaves us with 2 or 3 other aspects of this week's ImmPulse, which I think are interesting. Number one is some statistics which show a significant drop in temporary foreign workers. So the brakes they're putting on seem to be working. We always find that the system works by pivots. First, there's an onslaught of students. Then there's a huge cutback of students. Then there's an onslaught of workers. And now there's a huge cutback of workers. What this looks like for the future, we'll know in a couple of weeks when the immigration plan comes out. Statistics and plans for temporary workers and temporary residents in Canada now form a part of the annual plan. And so the thinking for 2026 and beyond is going to be evident soon.
Right. It'll be interesting to see if there are adjustments to the levels plans, where they prioritize. We see Manitoba, for example, has received a significant additional number of spots in their provincial program. We know the provinces are advocating hard to try to have more authority locally. And we see processing times are going up. So we need to really understand where Immigration Canada is going to put their priority going forward.
And if I can finish this discussion with a thought, I'm interested in seeing what program the federal government introduces to take advantage of the virtual shutdown of the H-1B program. And the Prime Minister alluded to technology workers. What's interesting is that when the express entry was adjusted for the specialized channels to come to Canada, tech workers were removed from that list.
Right.
In other words, if tech workers were so urgent, then they would be getting their own assessment process and their own assessment scoring. But they removed them. And there's healthcare workers, there's education workers, but there's not tech workers anymore in that grouping. So on one hand, we don't think we need these tech workers for permanent resident for long-term status. On the other hand, we're thinking of a program to capture these H-1B type tech workers to come to Canada. I'm not sure yet how all that's going to.
We'll see. And they've also, some advocates have suggested maybe for higher salaried individuals, might be entrepreneurs leading new operations. I'm not sure what target they're looking at yet. We'll wait to see what the policies define
Right.
as.
So immigration in the next 4 weeks is going to get mighty interesting. And when the government starts showing its hand in terms of what its thinking is, we're going to get an idea of what the immigration landscape is going to look like in 2026 and beyond.
Correct. Yeah.
If you have any questions about your application, whether or not you should be making an application, or where you think immigration is going in the future and how you might fit in that future, we'd be pleased to hear from you. Changes to the...
Sorry.
Well, you know what you do? Oh, yeah, do you. You do you, man. Go for it. You have to do
what's on the agenda for today? Well, you do that.
I don't even know what we're talking about. This is going to be the Howard
That,
Greenberg
actually,
show.
that should be the front end. A little honesty today, huh, Naman? Okay, let's go, because you guys got stuff to do, and we have no life. We have nothing to do.
We are ready.
Hi.